everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are here for the Wayne Public Library Jazz interview series. Today, we are going to be having a nice conversation with James Weidman, a pianist and educator. And as I've done more and more research to prepare for today, I realize, as I've spoken about in other interviews, there are many hats that these musicians wear. And in doing my research, I noticed that there's also composer. There's also uh, arranger, I believe, and we're going to get into all of this. So the biography is lengthy, and I think we should just jump right in. I do want to mention also that James was part of Joe Lovano's critically acclaimed Nonette, and which is a Grammy-nominated band, and I'm really excited to be here. So welcome, James.
Oh, Patty, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in. You have, as I said, an extensive biography, and there's so much to cover. So I'm going to do my best to keep it in time here. But you started performing when you were very young because you were from a musical family, right?
There was music all around the house and just in my little small universe as a toddler. My mother sang in what was called the senior choir at the Third Baptist Church in Youngstown, Ohio, and she would take me to rehearsals. She sang soprano, and from there, at an early age, I learned what a rehearsal was. You rehearsed the sopranos, the altos, the tenor, and the bass. My father would have musicians over even before he had a band, and I remember that he had this beat up clarinet. They had no mouthpiece, so I would blow through the barrel so I would feel like I was part of them. And they would play whatever they were playing at that time. And then later on, he had a band, and I was sitting at their rehearsals where he would have charts that he had written. And I was just around music, hearing music, heard jazz early. So that was very fortunate for me. I don't know whether I thought that I was going to be a musician. I probably even fought it through high school. I was just doing it. I was getting paid for it, but it was just something that I did.
She's actually started professionally then as a teenager, and that's an interesting thing that you weren't still 100% sure that that was what you wanted to do. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I know. I probably was about 12 or 13. I started playing in the church, playing and learning how to play properly gospel piano at a little small church, which someone might come up extemporaneously and start singing a song, and it would be in the key of B or E, and I would have to just find the key and play it. Even if I didn't know it, I knew well they all sort of ran a certain way, and I would put the appropriate chords behind it. And it was great, a young kid. He had a little money in his pocket doing that, and I started playing with my father, and so I was having a good time. I mean, I enjoyed music, no doubt. And I it wasn't like I disliked it. I probably, coming from Youngstown, I probably felt that I just want to make a living. I didn't see anybody really getting, well, they certainly weren't getting rich, but didn't even see them really making a living playing music. So I think that's why. When you go to school, they say, well, you should be an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, and all that kind of stuff. Nobody was saying, oh, you should be a musician. Except for my vocal music teacher in the high school. He kept battering me, trying to convince me
But
that's what I should do.
now I'm curious, are you also a singer then?
I sing because I worked with choirs and I didn't sing well. Plus, when I started working with choirs, my voice changed, and that was kind of a problem. As you can imagine, I'm trying to teach people parts that is right in the break of my voice. So it was a pretty situation. But I took voice lessons when I was in college. I studied with a voice teacher for 2 years just to try to understand the mechanics, which ultimately got me in a situation where before I started teaching at the university, I was vocal coaching because I knew enough about singing by that time to know the mechanics of the voice. and all those different technical things that one needs to do. So that coupled with my experience of working with singers in New York City and working with vocal coaches as well in my early years in New York City, I took all that information and did some vocal coaching. Matter of fact, I had a vocal student at the University of Georgia just these past 2 semesters.
So there's another hat we can attribute to you there. Were there any other instruments that you wanted to pursue?
Not wanted, but I did play clarinet. I wasn't very good at it, but I enjoyed playing in the marching band, the concert band, and trying to play the classe exercises. But I have a friend from school now. He said, "You know what we called you?" I said, "No." He said, "Fingers." Because I took no clarinet lessons, so when I played, my fingers were all over the place. I had no control over playing the clarinet.
So you were kind of doing your Charlie Parker thing on the clarinet, huh?
Yeah, it wasn't even close. But I enjoyed playing a wind instrument. From that standpoint, I thought it was very important, singing and playing wind instruments. When you think about the piano, particularly, which is a great mechanical structure of a of an instrument that you can't breathe through it, or you don't even have direct contact to producing musical tones.
I also learned to started piano when I was about 5, and still play a really mean Clementi sonatina, and then switched over to playing alto saxophone in grade school, and tried my best to play a very slow version of Scrapple from the Apple, and it was really slow. So, and then I retired at 8th grade. So I understand this need for trying to emulate, and but I learned that this was not my passion and my path. So,
Right. No, the wind instrument was not my path, but I learned a lot from playing it. And I still have that clarinet today. I had Roberta Wins actually do some work on it. It actually sounds pretty good. Last time
I
I played it was years ago.
so when we finally get you to play here at the library, you'll have to pull out that clarinet and do a piece or two on that. What do you think?
Well, I have a melodica and I have a something called a zafun, which
Hmm.
I actually recorded. I'll play those instead.
So, in doing also the research for today, the word myriad kept coming up in a lot of these interviews and background about you, of your skillfulness at myriad styles, and also the different background and influences you have, and your versatility. That was a word too that kept coming up. Now, myriad is defined as a countless or extreme great number, and again, in preparing for today, it's an amazing amount of things that you have accomplished, and all the things that seem to go into how you've developed your playing. Um, could you share some of the influences you had and the different musical styles that have helped to create what you're doing today?
Well, yeah, I think it was just organic. When I talk about my formative years, the fact that if you're going to play music, you had to play a lot of different things. So when I started piano lessons, I did the traditional type of study with the scales, and later on gravitated toward the Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven pieces. The I started at that church, which was my first paying gig, where I knew some gospel songs, but I never really had played gospel at all. So, what do? You do your research. There was a musician who actually played with my father, saxophone player, who was the superintendent of Sunday school, he would give me some albums to listen to, and I found my favorite piano players. They were piano players. Maybe they couldn't read music, but they played great. I would just try to borrow and emulate them. The same thing when I started to play organ. So whatever style that you were asked to play in, I just tried to understand what was necessary in order for me to come close to whatever that was supposed to be. So it was a very organic thing. So by the time I was in high school, that same music teacher who convinced me, well, he didn't quite convince me, but he kept badgering me that I should really think about music. I wasn't really thinking about that as a profession. But he said, I mean, but you do all these different things. By high school, I'm playing for the choir, I'm reading the music. I was a fairly good sight reader. I would, if they had a regional, an oboe player was playing, I would accompany him. I would play the Sonata Pathétique myself or something by Schumann and do well. So I'm playing all this music. And fortunately, in my family, there was no prejudice about music or styles or genres. It just has to be good music. My dad just liked music that was good, and he embraced all music. So, being in that background, I kind of inherit that type of mindset about what music was. So maybe in that manner, it was just easy for me because I just worked on all these different tracks at one time. It wasn't like you have some people who grew up in the European tradition and they're just trained just to read and they can't improvise, or some people play by ear and they can't read. There was none of that. I just saw all these things as part of being a musician at an early age.
You're very fortunate to have been exposed to that, and I have met musicians who um, are ear players or can read, and I always find it interesting to see where what the predominance is and what they go with. But it sounds like you were really exposed to so many different things. What if you had wanted to be in a rock and roll band? Would your father have been like, "Yeah, go for it"?
Well, he would have been okay, but there was something about me. I think I didn't want to really be in a rock and roll band or a band where you had to play the same thing the same way all the time. The only Because even if you were playing like a recital of the European composers or whatever, I mean, at least you have a little latitude about maybe you may want to interpret it this way the next, even though you have all these notes and that type of thing. That was, I guess, uh, for what my proclivities was, that was just too much of a narrow focus to be in either a funk band or a rock and roll band, any of those type of commercial vehicles, for instance.
So let's talk a little bit about the influences on you. Who are the musicians who influenced you predominantly? I had read that Charlie Parker was one.
Oh yeah, I would say even though I had heard jazz at an early age, it was at the point that I heard Charlie Parker that I realized the genius of the music. And Charlie Parker just opened the door for all the other great musicians that came after him or were working in tandem with him, like Dizzy Gillespie. Of course, Bud Powell traded his style. It was an amalgam of Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. That's the way he conceived the piano style. And the musicians, the pianists that preceded him, all for a long time came out of the Bud Powell model. I was driving home, as you know, Patty, and I said, "Oh man, I hadn't listened to Red Garland for a long time. And I'm listening to Red Garland playing all these Bud Powell licks on this trio album, and enjoying it or whatever." But it was all that. So at that time, for the type of music that I was playing, I wasn't playing anything like Charlie Parker, the music that is, because who would I play it with? Where would I play it? To give you a little small story, I was playing in the Bronx one time and Lou Donaldson came in. Lou Donaldson, he came up to me and said, "What's your name?" I said, James Weidman. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Youngstown, Ohio." He said, "You're not going to be playing any kind of jazz at all coming from Youngstown." So basically, the Youngstown wasn't, I mean, aside from organ jazz, if you were talking about trying to play something that was hard bop, that's known as that, or bebop, or, oh, where were you going to play it?
So there's an interview that I found where you were asked about what makes great musicians great. So Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, um, and your answer I really was enamored with, and I just want to share it. That the greatest musicians communicated directly to the listeners through their instruments. They were sonic scientists who often seemed to transcend their instruments, meaning we are not aware so much of what they played, but how they made us feel. And as we were talking a little bit earlier, I have the great gift of being able to feel music. And I love this quote because I think it really shows that relationship between the musician and the audience and what that, to me, it's alchemy, right? It's chemistry. It's there's something that you can't put your finger on, but there's a communication that's between the musicians. It's unspoken, but it's spoken through music. You're using your instruments, and then it also is transcended to the audience members. And music and jazz and all that tacit communication is just really amazing to me. Did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, that was a mouthful that I said, and I don't even remember saying it in that way. But I concur because there is a lot of alchemy involved. When I think about the musicians that I would listen to in those early days, I always go back to that. I even think about here's a great story, and that had to be some sort of alchemy. I'm probably 5 years old. This is before Charlie Parker, the Charlie Parker experience. So I have a little record player and I'm playing my little kiddie records for that particular day. Like there was this one, there's a little white duck sitting in the water. You know, these little corny songs you probably, and I don't know whether they still do them. But anyway, that's what I was listening to. I probably was playing it over and over. My dad had come with a new 45 Prestige records, okay? John Coltrane, Good Bait. So I said, all right. Uh, he said, all right. He said, why don't you listen to this? So he puts this on the big machine. And that really captured me because I had never really heard a saxophone, at least on television, played like that. Because if you're doing rock and roll, rhythm and blues, you're honking and all that type. But here's someone who's playing with a lot of technical precision. Every now and then I hear that sound that I recognize. I would say it was the soulful sound was coming from the saxophone. Then he would start running again. I said, wow, it was really something. And then I enjoyed, you turn it over, he's trading with the drummer. I would be on the hassock trying to figure out when he's coming back in. But that had a real effect on me. Matter of fact, I liked him, but I wanted a drum set for Christmas just because of the drummer who I later found out was Arthur Taylor, was trading these fours with the saxophone. So,
I, I'm very glad you mentioned John Coltrane. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I had the pleasure and honor, really, of seeing you perform with the William Patterson Jazz faculty, the faculty during one of the summer jazz workshops where you were doing a tribute to John Coltrane.
mm,
And I want to say this was 2017 or 2018 in July. And you performed with David Dempsey on saxophone, Tim Newman on trombone. You were on piano, Steve Laspina on bass, and a special guest drummer was Winard Harper. And it was the first day of the 5 day series in the summer. And I have to tell you, and I'm still always talking to David Dempsey and Pete McGinnis about that, and Bill Charlap to say, bring back the faculty concerts, because that was the highlight of that week for me. To be able to showcase the talent of the staff is something that I think is super important. And we're so fortunate to have William Patterson in our backyard and literally 5 minutes away, and have all these wonderful guest performers come in and to see the students perform in their ensembles. But the faculty is stellar. And I don't think that the public had the opportunity or has the opportunity to really understand and know what kind of great scholars, great kind of teachers, and how you're imparting the importance of learning jazz to this next generation. So I am grateful that you were part of that I got to witness it and enjoy it. And it was really special. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Were there any other influences that you had at your father was an influence on you? Yes.
Oh, absolutely. My father. And when I think about really his own musical experience, uh, I had videotaped him a few years ago because I wanted him to talk about going to school because there was a regular band. They also had a small band entitled the Southern Swingers, and he said that they played Fletcher Henderson, Count Basie charts, maybe some Duke Ellington. And what was great about it was that many of the students had already heard this music, so it was easy to interpret what you saw it on the page. And high school was so great for him because of the music. You know, when you think about in today's climate, that so much funding, especially in black schools, schools that are predominantly black. Because my dad, when came from the South, Meridian, Mississippi, was segregated. Music was one of the first things to go. And when you think about the contributions of music to America and to the world by Black Americans, people who originally came from Africa, that's kind of astounding and remarkable to think that is the thing that goes on, that music is not valued unless it's just a commodity for somebody to make money out of. And now, you know, it's the streaming services that make money. And that's been kind of the problem that we deal with between the whole commercial aspect of getting a product out there and the people who want to make money off the project. And then the musicians, they just want to play and make good music.
Along those lines, do you find that the pandemic was then a boon of sorts for musicians to be able to explore putting out their own music in a digital sort of way, or connecting and doing live streams for themselves, and being able to perform digitally with musicians from all over the world, even though you're stuck at home? I find it an interesting benefit from the pandemic, aside from us not being, obviously the downside was we couldn't see live music. But do you think that there was influences, positive influences now on the music industry from the pandemic?
Well, certainly musicians want to play, they want to perform. So the positive thing that came out of it, that you can't keep a good musician down. He's going to find a way to perform. So yes, the streaming became one piece. I think a lot of musicians just hunkered down and started writing music and doing things because this is what musicians do. Yeah, from that standpoint, I think, yeah, that opened the door for opportunity.
We were very fortunate. The Wayne Public Library received an ARPA grant last year, and part of it has to do with outreach, and part of it has to do with expanding our programming. And starting next week, we are actually going to be having a series of jazz concerts that are in person, but also the hybrid with the live stream. So I think the way that we're kind of looking at things is this hybrid performance. I'm wondering if it's going to be part of the musical landscape going forward for a very long time, because it allows those who are unable to attend in person, or either because they're not able to go to locations like New York City, or are not comfortable yet with in person. I think it offers such a wonderful extension, if you will. And I'm really excited that we're able to continue doing it. Do you feel that this is going to continue in the greater scheme of things?
It seems so. I think that there's still a lot of people who may not be comfortable with going out all the time. And just from the standpoint, people do have access to computers or devices which they can see concerts, and it'll be an important piece. And the live music, of course, will always be important. I would like to see it continue.
One of the opportunities I had a couple of weeks ago, I was able to interview Rini Rosnes, and she had just participated in a tribute for Chick Corea that was in Lincoln Center that John Patitucci had put together. Now, I would never have been able to go to Lincoln Center to see this, but I got the ticket for live streaming, and it was fantastic to be able to participate as a virtual viewer. So
Yeah.
I really hope that for me, that it continues to give me the opportunity to see performances in New York City or in Europe or wherever it's happening. It'll give me a greater exposure to music than I wouldn't necessarily have. I have a wonderful quote that you have of advice your father gave you when you first started playing was keep in time, stay out of the way, and tell a story. And I think that that's great advice actually on many levels of our lives, musically or not. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was so basic to the way one would want to perform jazz or most music. When Marcellus often talks about the democracy of playing jazz within a group. So you have certain responsibilities. You want to be in sync, you want to be in time with each other. You want to stay out of the way of somebody's story. You know, the respect for all the musicians who you're playing with. And your presentation, you want to tell a story. I remember when my father first told me, I would say, a story? Well, how do you tell a story? I started listening to these recordings to see, well, what was their story? How do you make whatever you're communicating become that mystical thing, that mystical story? So it's something that takes time, you know, especially for a young musician to be able to even approach, because he's trying to learn the language. I was just trying to find the right notes to play with an accord at an early age. Story. So, you know, it's a process that you continue working on that whole idea to make your music communicate better, to it is an art, it never ends. You know, you're always trying to be better at your communication skills.
that's a real wisdom bomb your father dropped on you there at such a young age.
Yeah,
But
right.
it made an impact.
I'm telling you.
So I noted that the different musical styles that you have explored and you had touched on as well are classical, gospel, um, bebop, and jazz, but also avant-garde jazz, which you were part of Steve Coleman and Us Three, not Us Three, excuse me.
And yeah, that you think about the us five elements. Steve Coleman, five elements.
I'm getting my numbers and letters all confused here.
No, yeah.
So playing avant-garde jazz is a different skill set, is it not?
Well, of course, avant-garde, that's a wide umbrella of a lot of different things. I I guess I forgot who said this, but you said, you say the avant-garde, that's a term for somebody on the front line and they always get offed. But we could say experimental music, I guess. Uh, Maybe that would be better, something that's kind of on the edge. And I think you have to be brave and open-minded in order to approach that. This Steve Coleman tells the story of one drummer who was given music to possibility for the possibility of playing with the group. And so the next morning there was a knock on the door. The music was like at the doorstep. He left. He said, "I don't want anything to do with this. It was just too much. It was too different, and that type of thing." So I guess there has to be again a certain amount of bravery and fearlessness in embracing the new. And Steve was and is a musical thinker. And he's came up with different concepts. And there were other people who had other, Greg Osby, Robin Eubanks, a lot of people had different concepts, not all the same, but all of us together were just trying to push the limits and trying to think of music differently than what was previously thought of. Taking things from the past and incorporating it in a different way.
Did you compose for that group?
Yes, I had a couple compositions that they recorded. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had seen Steve Coleman perform in the Village Vanguard, and it was interesting. I enjoyed the journey. It was different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to try to explain it to somebody who wasn't in there, privy to what was going on, it would take a while. But it was well thought out.
I think it's akin to what you were saying about learning a language and speaking and developing different language skills. That it's a different language that and when I was in that performance, I felt like I was hearing something completely new and different that I had never been exposed to, and that it was unfamiliar, which makes one uncomfortable. But at the same time, there is something familiar about it, and it was exciting to be part of that journey.
Right. There's so many musicians throughout the whole epoch of the music called jazz who did that for people. I think of Cecil Taylor, for instance. And when I was studying at the university, there was a piano pedagogy class. I think that's what it was. And we were asked to bring in different pianists who we would like. So I said, I want to bring in Cecil Taylor. So actually, the teacher for that particular class was actually my piano teacher, Marceline Hawk. And she said, oh, she recognized right away. He said, that man has created his own language. And there was somebody who I think we all admit was difficult for the masses of people to really understand. I remember going to a Central Park free concert. I can't even remember who played before, but it was something that was a little more popular and more familiar. So everybody was having a good time, and here comes Cecil Taylor. I noticed how people just slowly got up and left as he was playing. They weren't ready for that. I mean, they didn't see that one coming at all. And I was sitting there, I was enjoying it. And I especially enjoyed hearing Cecil Taylor live.
I had a notation that one of the things that you were experimenting with is making different sounds with the piano or making the piano sound like a different instrument. Am I correct in this?
Well, I guess more or less. I don't try to remember the context. But yeah, one, and I probably tell students that no matter what type of music they're playing, but even, let's say if I have a couple students who are comp measures and I applied piano. So I'm actually teaching a little bit of European tradition music. which I never expected to do. But during the pandemic, I actually sort of got my chops and my eyes back up again. And sort of the mentality. A lot of it was like knowing where your fingers are going, thinking like by fingerings and things like that again, and just being able to see patterns. But that being said, I often tell them, okay, you're playing Bach. Okay, this top part, that could be the oboe. You know, think about the parts as the way that he orchestrates things. So the piano, in that sense, may be the first synthesizer. So you listen to somebody like Oscar Peterson, you may hear a lot of different things. You may hear like horn-like lines. You may hear, if you hear Errol Garner, you might hear in his left-handed guitar when he's chomp, 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 chomp. You hear McCoy Tyner, you may hear the oceans and volcanoes and all kinds of different things. So the piano, being the mechanical construct that it is capable of stoking one's imagination about what that sound could possibly be.
That's a fascinating way of putting it. I've never really thought about it. I'm glad that you brought that to here. Is the fact of being able to convey not only different sounds but different ideas. That's really fascinating. Now you also play, aside from acoustic piano, you played the Hammond C3 organ, as well as synthesizers and created electronic music media. What is what are the different things that you bring when playing these different types of instruments?
Well, I started on the Hammond organ, and it was actually, as I later found out, was a V3, a very early version, maybe a precursor to the B3, but better constructed because it was pre-war and they put a little more money in the architecture. They kind of cheated on how they made the organ after World War II came around. But that being said, one great thing about the organ was that you could sustain a note, you could get this bluesy sound, and again, you could create this roaring sound and screaming sounds or whatever, because of the nature of the Hammond organ. Then I played the Rhodes piano, which had its own different quality to it. But the interesting thing for me, as I started playing more acoustic piano, and by this time I'm trying to play mainstream jazz, the language of Charlie Parker and everything, I said, wow, the piano is different. Now I have to rethink how I hear sound. And it took me a while because there weren't a lot of acoustic piano gigs in Youngstown. I came to New York and I started to play more acoustic gigs, but it took me a while to hear myself, to figure out what my sound is. So it's a little different because of the nature of the piano. The piano is a little more percussive, the notes decay quicker. So my thing was, well, I'll take everything from the past and see if I can create a more lyrical type of style on the piano rather than.
Did it influence your playing synthesizers then?
Yeah, well, I think the organ did. Yeah, because they're very similar in terms of the sustaining aspect of it.
That's really interesting. Were you influenced at all by Ray Charles?
Well, now that's a funny question. I heard a lot of Ray Charles growing up, and so I mean, I was familiar with a lot of the hits, "Drown in My Own Tears," "Georgia," "What I'd Say," all those different things. I heard so much of that music. The influence as a pianist, well, it's a funny thing. Dakota Staten, when I used to fill in for Bross Townsend, she told me to listen to a little bit of Ray Charles because I probably had kind of a one-dimensional idea about how to play the blues, and she wanted me to get into a little more variety about what a blues performance would be. So here in New York, I kind of did a little more homework at that point to listen to Ray to see where that was coming from. And interesting enough, here's something recent. They just had a commencement at the University of Georgia, and they had a contest, and they had picked a vocalist from the school student to sing "Georgia on My Mind." So I asked my colleague, "Oh, you ever hear the Ray Charles recording?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay." I said, "I think I'll write an arrangement for the vocalist." So I wrote one for the jazz ensemble, and she was very thrilled about it, and it really caused a great effect, her performance in particular. And but if it wasn't for Ray Charles or hearing that so much, I probably wouldn't have wrote the arrangement the way I wrote the arrangement.
I asked the question because when I hear Ray Charles, I always associate him with the electric piano.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, he played this wordless piano on What I'd Say, and I can't say that was influence, but I remember when I first heard that too. And if you know what the song was all about, we kind of had these sexual overtones and stuff like that. I was 5 years old singing the song, "Yeah, baby, it feels so good." Dad laughs at me and says, "You don't know what you're talking about."
I have had that experience as well with certain Broadway show lyrics and things that we had growing up, and we would sing them with great, zeal and fervor. And even, gosh, in my high school years, or listening to Madonna and singing different, lyrics, I look back and I'm like, what were we doing? I had no idea.
Yeah, those rather mature lyrics.
There's a turn that I didn't expect for this to take. So anyway. So, as a musician, since you have played in so many different formations, whether it's solo as in a trio or quartet, quintet, now nonet, I like that word very much, or big band. What are the different responsibilities that one needs to bring to each of those formations?
Okay, well, should I start big and go small?
Either way, but
Well, we'll
I'm
do
kind
that.
of
Let's say if you
curious.
was a non-ent or big band, that's where stay out the way is very important. And
Stay in your lane kind of thing.
yeah, because a lot of times the big band may have a lot of passages. You don't want to trip over that. But the one thing that I learned, and this was being in the jazz ensemble at Youngstown State University, we would perform a lot of Thad Jones compositions, and Thad Jones, of course, was instrumental in instituting the jazz program at William Patterson. I would listen to Roland Hanna, and I learned a lot from him because he had such wit. They would do this tune entitled "Little Pixie," and if anybody has a chance, they should listen to it. Like he would just play little things in the crack, and it was very humorous, very witty. And I would listen to that and would try to emulate that type of thing, and playing the fills, the type of fills that oh, Count Basie was famous for, Duke Ellington. I think you would have to listen to those two people, the way that they played in big bands, the way they would color in between the cracks of an arrangement and things like that. I think those things are very important from a general standpoint. Quartet, it just being a good accompanist. I think your main role is how you play in the rhythm section. If it's your band, then you have a reign of how you want your quartet to sound and how you play and accompany your musicians besides just being a soloist is very instructive. If you're playing in a duo without drummer, what you have to be mindful of is being in sync with each other rhythmically. And there's, I think if you're playing trio, to know the history of the trio, for me personally, for me, I start with Nat Cole. Art Taylor's group had great arrangements. Nat Cole had great arrangements. Oscar Peterson, he took from a lot of what Nat Cole did to create what they did, he and Ray Brown together. So you hear a certain type of organization within the trio. Ahmad Jamal started off with bass guitar and piano, later on with drums. And again, there was this feeling of orchestration and arrangement. And if you deal with something a little more contemporary, there's Cedar Walton has so many albums with his acclaimed trio with David Williams and Billy Higgins. Cedar being a great arranger, composer, and pianist. And there's a good example just from a drummer standpoint. Billy Higgins did something for Cedar Walton that Danny Richmond did for Charlie Mingus, just in terms of I couldn't think of anybody else being in that role and being able to play the music in that way.
How long were you at William Patterson University?
Oh, it was almost 20 years. And in fact, it was over 20 years, probably 20, 21 years. And James Williams, by the way, James Williams were largely instrumental in me coming to New York because I'm still on the fence. Am I good enough? What will I have to do? Oh, joy. Oh, my. I can't stay in Youngstown. But he said, "Oh yeah, you should come to New York. You should, in his matter of fact way." And so there I was. I was in New York. He was still in Boston at Berkeley, but working with Art Blakey and doing all kinds of great things. But I was his first call. He was the director at the time. Margaret Miller came next. Now Bill Charlotte, and he called me to ask me to be part of the faculty. So that's how it began.
In all those 20 years plus, are there any highlights or anecdotes that come to mind?
Well, I tell you, here's one. My first day, I'm listening to an ensemble, and in the ensemble, do you know the name Tyshawn Sori?
I'm not familiar, but I'm now going to look it up.
Okay, well, right now he's writing operas and symphonies, and he actually ended up playing with Steve Coleman. Great musical mind, but this student, first he's playing trombone, then he's playing the drums. He's a drummer and a composer. Then he's playing the piano. And all I could do is sit back and go, I mean, a real monster, really incredible musician. And this, I mean, there's nothing no one could even say to him because this guy, you could tell that he was just going places. And that was my first experience. First ensemble, I said, okay, amazing. But that was just for one period. He had played three instruments, all of them well. But if you look him up now, he's been doing a lot of great musical things.
Are there any favorite collaborators you've had that you've been able to perform with over the years?
Oh, yes. Well, we could start with TK Blue. We made our first collaborative record together. And during the 90s, we performed a lot at a place called Vigioli's, which no longer exists. But and did some gigs in the Caribbean. But that was a great collaboration. There's a collaborative project that I'm involved with now. He's not a household name in jazz, even though he studied with Tony Williams. He had been in the commercial market for many years, but he's working on a multimedia project that involves keyboard, spoken word, and art, and all these different things.
And what is their name?
L Mac is his name. So yeah, he's a great collaborator.
Are there any performers and other fellow musicians that you'd like to still perform with that you haven't had the opportunity yet?
Oh, there's so many. I feel in a way I've sort of stayed in a kind of a lane, whatever my trajectory was. And I said, boy, I never had a chance to perform with that person. But you just mentioned, and we've only intersected in some small areas over the years. Christian McBride, that would be a nice collaboration that I would like to do. And so when I think about James Williams, one of the things he did before he passed, he was making this recording, and I think a lot of them were dual recordings, but he had, I don't know how many, 20, 30 musicians coming in to record. So it was just like a documentation of all these different musicians who came together to play with him. Uh, um, Alvin Queen, the last drummer with Oscar Peterson, who lives in Geneva. Boy, now I said Christopher McBride, now there would be a trio. Christopher McBride and Alvin Queen.
How do we make this happen?
Well, I don't know. I probably need to just start badgering people, you know. But we're all so dispersed these days. The apart from me just being kind of going down a path and not having the chance to intersect with as many people as I would like to, is like what it takes in order to put something up. The recording opportunities, and then we're more separated than before. It wasn't like the days where you came to New York, you go from one club, you go to the next club, you see all these people, or the community is a little different. So, but that doesn't mean it is impossible.
So I'd like to just talk a little bit more about you as an educator and that what are the things that you want to impart to your students or have imparted to your students over the years? That's a big question.
Yes. Well, the thing that students need to do first and foremost is to listen. And that's one word, but that's on a lot of different levels. Listen in terms of if they're playing any type of music, listen to other artists, how they play, learn the vocabulary, do your research, listen to yourself. Try to, if you're playing jazz music, find the notes that you like, how they connect to each other. I think that's very important. And just nurture the love that you have for the music. Is really about the love, and is really about the communication of that love to other people.
I found another couple quotes from you where you shared the more genres you're comfortable with, the deeper your understanding of music, which is very true. So, as you're explaining, the students should explore different genres and well, you're the teacher. You tell me.
Well, yeah, have an open mind and be open to sound. Sometimes that can be difficult because you hear something and then you immediately have an opinion about it. You say, "Oh, I don't like that. Well, that's strange." Or like for instance, I might have a student who's not even jazz, but maybe they're reading music and then they play something separate from everything else and they hear this dissonance and then they're afraid of the dissonance. Oh man, that sounds terrible. I said, but it's resolving. It could be, and that could be just Chopin, all right, or it could be Monk. But you have to embrace those sounds, at least be open to the sound and non-critical. I mean, you'll have your likes, you have the things that you'll gravitate more than others, but I think the open mind part is very important because we have enough opinions in the world and we have enough closed mind in the world, and music may be the easiest thing to maybe practice having an open mind toward, as opposed to some sort of polemic.
That's valuable advice, and I don't know if you can teach someone to be open, but you can encourage them, and hopefully they will do so.
Right.
One of the other notations of I found here is that you had talked about having good technique, and you said the better your technique, the better your communication.
Yeah, I think so. And technique could be a lot of different things. I think Thelonious Monk had the perfect technique for what he did. And he worked at that technique. Or like Barry Harris often would say, he believed that Monk woke up one day and decided to be different. So you listen to the sounds that he created on the piano, the way he held his hands and all that different thing. All that was on purpose. But he perfected it to a T to communicate his musical ideas, to communicate what that was. He felt very strongly about. So yeah, Charlie Parker practiced. I think he said 10 hours a day in order to express what he wanted to express. And realize, you hear the stories when he started off. He went to the jam session. He didn't know what he was doing, but he said, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I better find out because there's something inside of me that wants to do something, and the only way that I can get to the place of doing it is by practicing it and mastering my instrument and mastering the music."
So, where's the fine line when you're teaching your students, when you're conveying that a student should think about a composer's intentions for the piece that they wrote, and then how a student musician or any musician will then interpret it for themselves?
Okay, like what type of music, for instance, an example?
We could take let's just take jazz.
Okay, well, first thing, okay, if it was Monk, Monk is pretty specific, and there's a lot of things out there. Sometimes I just like if you have a piano part written out with the voicings. There's a lot of things to learn from that harmonically. But there is also the other part. I think with jazz, the most important thing is, unlike the music of the European tradition, the rhythm is is elevated to the same level as harmony and melody. So you have to develop the correct rhythmic sense in order to play it properly. And that's the biggest thing that I work with those students, to understand the importance of playing those rhythms and the meaning of those rhythms. And it becomes a little difficult for some students if you've gone through a traditional training where all you learn is harmony and melody, as opposed to a rhythmic concept, particularly a rhythmic concept that's on the same plane.
That's fascinating. I'm glad that we kind of explored this a little bit because you are talking about something that's unique to jazz and teaching jazz, and I think very interesting. So you are now assistant professor of jazz piano and African American studies at the Franklin College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Georgia. You started there in 2021?
August.
Wow. In the middle
Yeah.
of a pandemic.
Yeah. And the whole interview process with in my house, in my apartment, on Zoom. It wasn't even face to face. Fancy that. But yeah, part of the Hugh Hodgins School of Music at the Franklin Arts. And it's been a great 2 semesters to begin with. Very exciting, very different.
Does this position give you an opportunity where you're teaching music, but are you also teaching the history of music and all that it brings to the students?
I'm teaching as part of the African American Studies Department, African American music history, which was my first semester doing it. So I was putting the course together pretty much as I go, and as you know, I'm finding all this great background material. Plus, there's just the archival material of my mind, just the whole history of what I've been through, what I experienced, and everything, and putting it all together. What's great about that particular semester is that there were a handful of music students per se, but they were all from different fields. They were history, psychology, chemistry, what have you. And we all just went on to this journey about how the music developed here in North America without drums, the blues, the spirituals, and we moved through the 20th century in a rapid speed to hip hop and everything. Because when you think about it, it was almost like mind bending the way styles would change, and a lot of that had to do with the industry and things being out of fashion, so to speak, and a new trend coming up and all this type of stuff. And I had some really interesting essays from the students. I was very happy to hear how they thought about the music that they listened to after seeing the developments of music from the 19th century in particular to the 20th century.
It's so important to teach the history of how we get to where we are on many levels.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm hoping that students and listeners as well understand how much we have to honor and respect where it started, and that this is the music from African Americans, the amalgamation of ragtime, of blues, of spirituals, of work songs, and how it all created that foundation that was then built to then create other variations of jazz. I'm hoping that people are receptive to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and I've had done presentations over the years about it, but to teach the course and finding these other, I would call them hidden figures, people that hadn't really been talked about that much, what their contributions were, particularly after the Civil War, after slavery had ended, and you're trying to make a path in the entertainment or the music business, or even the development of the meaning of the blues, the spirituals, and how all these things so were really honored by the early musicians who started to become trained in terms of what we would call formal music, writing music down and all that type of thing, where those musicians, like you would take New Orleans musician would go like Pops Foster. He would give an itinerant musician a quarter just to listen to how he would bend a note in the blues so he could play the blues properly in the vernacular using those proper folk elements to play jazz in those early days. It was that type of thing. Charlie Parker was known to be a great progenitor of blues playing. With everything else that he did, he could play the blues. So that became a badge of honor, especially for the African American musicians, to be able to play the blues without playing the blues, to have that feeling within the music. And then
You
there's
know
the
what?
other things, the connection that Dizzy Gillespie made with the Afro-Cuban component or the Caribbean component. You talk about Monty Alexander, we were talking about him earlier. You know, that was one of the beautiful things that come to New York that I didn't have that experience in Youngstown. We were playing straight ahead music like at the university, but to come to Youngstown, I mean, to come to New York and hear the different clave rhythms, the calypso, people from Africa playing, and then, oh man, I should really try to figure out what that was and try to incorporate that language. So it's beautiful.
As you're talking, one of the things that just came to mind is, and I'm wondering if this is an influence from the gospel tradition, is the call and response. Does jazz incorporate, when you're trading off your different solos or improvisations within 8 bars or 16 bars or 32 bars, is it almost a call and response type structure?
Oh yeah, well, if you have like a communication, for instance, I'll give you a good example in a modern jazz situation. Maybe a soloist is playing something, and the drummer responds, or the rhythm section responds to what the soloist is doing. That's that's a call and response. If you listen to a lot of the early big band orchestrations, like Count Basie, for instance, they had a lot of things that were taken from the church and the blues with those riffs and things, and you hear the back and forth situation. So yeah, that definitely is part of the music in that type of context, that type of conversation of the back and forth.
And all the key there, as you pointed out earlier, is listening.
Yes, of course. You know, but a good call and response tune would be a Bobby Timmons moaning. You know, every da 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 do da. That's the response right there. Da da do da 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 da.
So we have two questions for one of our participants from Herman. The first is, as his comment is, as a musician from Mexico, I've had my fair share exposure to fusion of Mexican folk rhythms like huapango and jazz. Have you had the need to incorporate certain styles or rhythms from Africa in a more straightforward way into your music or into certain specific musical projects?
Oh yes, I a couple of days ago I played a composition in Athens, Georgia. They have a series going on through the week. It's called Chamber Music Athens. So this piece is entitled "Our Journey," and I actually wrote the composition, recorded it on my album Three Worlds. But the composition was inspired by a recording I was listening to of the Baka people in the forest of South Cameroon. They were singing sort of in a Hocket manner, but this rhythm that they were doing, I based the bass line from. So it has an African sixth form, and that's one of my more blatant attempts of that type of fusion. But I played it solo, and I also played, which I've recorded differently, but I've played it live, Thelonious Monk's Ugly Beauty, which I often superimpose that rhythm to that as well.
So the other question that Herman had was, when I had the great honor of being your student at William Patterson, you mentioned a key word that has stuck with me all these years, and the word is texture. He wanted to ask, isn't texture a musical story in itself?
Yeah, well, it definitely creates the landscape for a musical story. Because if you start, uh, let me think of Keith Jarrett, what his early solo concerts. Maybe he would start with one note. And that might be, and that one note, oh, I should preface it by saying that Keith would advertise these concerts as being totally improvised. It was like totally unplanned. So he would start with one note. And then that evolved into a whole soundscape for maybe 10 minutes. And then it might morph into something else. So the texture is like the beginning. It's like the beginning of whatever your story is going to be. Without texture, there might not be any story.
I'm sad to see that time is passing very quickly, I'm so grateful for your making the time for me today. I just want to talk about some of the bands that you're actually performing with now. You seem to be very busy, and I don't know how you have so much energy to do all this. You're playing with a group called the Aperturistic Trio. I love the name of that. I actually looked up the fact that aperture is a space or an opening that allows in light. And was that the reason, or one of the reasons that you call the trio is called that?
Yes, I did. And being not the Madison Avenue advertising guy, a lot of people seem to have problems with that word. But you got it, but you're a researcher, so kudos to you.
Thank you. I was so taken with it, and I thought that's a perfect name for a trio. So I really think it's wonderful. So kudos for you for naming it. That's one of the many things you're doing right now. You're also with a group called the Rhythm Keepers.
Right. Yeah, those are some ongoing groups in which the Rhythm Keepers, well, right before I left, we did live streaming for the jazz, I think it was the Jazz Forum, yeah. I would like to get it started again, but an iteration of the Aperturistic Trio will be performing May 22nd. Uh, that's 2022. I better just put the whole date just in case.
And
Uh,
that's in East Meadow, New York, with a
yes,
live streaming as
yeah, right,
well.
yeah, right, yeah. It'll be live streaming too. And
The information is actually on your website, which is www.jamesweidman.com. And that's a wonderful way to be able to view that if you're unable to make it to East Meadow. And one of the other groups that you're performing with is the James Weidman Steve Williams Quartet.
right, and we hadn't done anything in a while too because of my move, really. And but one of the projects that we were working on with together was Clifford Jordan's music uh, through the blessings of his wife Sandy Jordan. And one of the last time we performed was downtown. What was that place called? The Cafe 88. Anyway, it's no longer exists. It was just around for a short time. And it was the last time that I saw Roy Hargrove because he was a guest artist. And so we played some of Clifford Jordan's music at that place, which was it was a great project. I hope to resurrect that at some point. But I also have a quartet in Athens. Um, there's Derek James, who used to live around in the New York area. He was going to West Point at the time that he played with me. He lives in Atlanta, and he comes down and play with that group. So I have a bunch of Georgia area musicians, and we've done a few concerts at this church, the Ebenezer Baptist Church West, and we'll be playing a Juneteenth performance next month, and that will be also on YouTube live stream where everybody can see it all over the world.
That's wonderful. I hope you can add that information to your website because I think that live stream is going to be fantastic.
Oh, it will be there. I do have the listing there, and I'll try to put everything there. Plus, I'm upgrading my website, which hopefully, who knows, by that time, maybe it will be finished.
Well, it's amazing that you're here. You are based in Georgia. You drove up last night to New York, straight shot there, which I'm applaud you for. And tonight you're actually going to perform with the Peter Hand Big Band in Greenwich, Connecticut, at the Byram Schubert Library. So yeah, again, your energy is amazing to me.
Well,
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time. I very much enjoyed this conversation, and I've learned a lot from you as well. And as I always do, I'm so fortunate to have the ability to um, have these programs and to meet such wonderful musicians and teachers, and the importance of being able to share and champion what you do, but also in a selfish way, learn for myself. So thank you very much.
well, Patty, thanks again, and thanks everyone who are here today. Ramon, Denise.
So you have a great night and safe travels to you and all that you do. And we'll see you online and hopefully sometime we'll see you very soon in person.
I hope so. Thank you so much.